What would you do if a being from another world told you that Earth, this planet you've lived on your entire life, was his childhood home? Not a colony they established. Not a planet they visited centuries ago. But the actual birthplace where his species evolved, thrived, built civilizations, and then departed, leaving behind descendants who would forget everything they once knew. I'm about to share a story that will completely transform how you understand human history, your place in the cosmos, and why ancient teachers like Jesus possessed abilities that seem impossible today. Because what Dr. Elena Chen discovered in the Nevada desert on September 23, 2022, didn't just challenge everything science teaches about human evolution. It revealed that humanity's greatest spiritual teachers were messengers from our own lost family, trying desperately to help us remember what we had forgotten. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear isn't just another alien encounter story. It's the missing piece that makes your entire existence finally make sense. The piece that explains why you've always felt like something important is just beyond your memory. Why ancient spiritual teachings resonate so deeply. Why you sense abilities within yourself that society says are impossible. And if you're ready to truly understand who you really are beneath the amnesia, access the divine source that exists within you, and reconnect with your true cosmic heritage, our exclusive guide is waiting in the first pinned comment below this video. The ebook Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence will take you deeper into these truths and give you practical methods to begin your own awakening. Click that link now, and then come right back, because what I'm about to tell you will change everything. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened when Dr. Elena Chen met a wanderer who called Earth home, and how his revelations about Jesus will shatter everything you thought you knew about spirituality, human potential, and the true purpose of your existence. Dr. Elena Chen had spent 28 years studying rocks. Not just any rocks, the oldest geological formations on Earth. The ancient stone memories of a planet that had witnessed 4.5 billion years of transformation, catastrophe, and rebirth. At 52 years old, she had become one of the world's leading experts in Precambrian geology, the study of Earth's most ancient past, those mysterious eons before complex life emerged, when the planet was still writing its earliest chapters. But on that September afternoon in 2022, alone in the remote Nevada desert, Elena wasn't thinking about her career or her reputation or the academic papers that had made her name respected in geological circles around the world. She was thinking about how empty her life had become. How the passionate young scientist who had once believed she was uncovering Earth's deepest secrets had gradually transformed into a lonely woman who spent more time with ancient stones than with living human beings. Her husband Michael had died 5 years earlier in a climbing accident in the Rockies. A sudden fall, a tragedy that came without warning and left Elena alone with a grief she had never fully processed. She had thrown herself into her work instead, burying her pain beneath layers of field research, laboratory analysis, and academic writing. Her 2 daughters, both now in their 20s, had gently tried to reach her, but Elena had pulled away, unable to bear the vulnerability that real connection required. And so she had ended up here, 4 to 7 miles from the nearest town, studying a geological formation that made absolutely no sense according to everything she knew about how rocks formed. The site had been discovered by a surveying team 6 months earlier and had immediately been flagged as anomalous. When Elena first saw the photographs, her scientific mind had rejected what her eyes were showing her. The patterns in the stone were too regular, too geometric, too deliberately structured to be natural. Natural geological processes created beautiful patterns. Yes, the hexagonal columns of basalt, the concentric circles of agate, the layered beauty of sedimentary stone. But they didn't create mathematical precision. They didn't create symbols that looked almost like writing. They didn't create formations that seemed to have been designed with conscious intention. Elena had driven out to see it for herself, expecting to find some mundane explanation that the surveyors had missed. Perhaps it was an old foundation from some forgotten mining operation. Perhaps it was modern vandalism made to look ancient. Perhaps it was a natural formation that only appeared geometric from certain angles. But when she arrived and saw it with her own eyes, she knew immediately that none of those explanations would work. The formation was massive, a curved wall of dark stone emerging from the desert floor, approximately 30 feet high and over 100 feet long. And carved into its surface were patterns that made Elena's heart race and her scientific certainty crumble. They weren't quite writing. They weren't quite mathematical notation. They weren't quite artistic decoration. They were something that existed in the space between all three, symbols that her rational mind couldn't categorize but that stirred something deep in her consciousness, something that felt almost like recognition. Elena had set up camp that first day, intending to stay for a week of intensive study. She had photographed the formation from every angle, taken surface samples, used ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface structure. Every test, every analysis, every measurement confirmed what her intuition had already told her. This formation was old, impossibly old, dating back over 100,000 years according to the weathering patterns and the geological strata it was embedded in. But 100,000 years ago, there were no human civilizations. There were small bands of Homo sapiens just beginning to migrate out of Africa, primitive hunter-gatherers who had barely mastered fire. There was no writing, no mathematics, no art beyond the most rudimentary expressions. There was certainly no capacity to carve geometric precision into solid stone. And yet here it was. Undeniable. Impossible. Real. Elena had written up her preliminary findings and submitted them to 3 different geological journals. All 3 had rejected the papers, suggesting politely that she re-examine her methodology, that she consider more conventional explanations, that she perhaps was allowing her imagination to override her scientific judgment. One reviewer had written, with barely concealed condescension, that pattern-seeking behavior was a known cognitive bias and that Dr. Chen might benefit from a sabbatical to regain her objectivity. The rejections had stung, but they hadn't surprised her. Academia was conservative by nature, and anything that challenged fundamental assumptions about human history was automatically suspect. Elena had seen it happen before to colleagues who made claims that fell outside acceptable boundaries. They were politely dismissed, their reputations quietly damaged, their careers subtly undermined. And so Elena had returned to the site alone, not to prove anything to the academic establishment anymore, but because something in her soul wouldn't let her leave it alone. The formation called to her in ways she couldn't explain to anyone, least of all to herself. She would sit beside it for hours, her hands pressed against the ancient stone, feeling a connection she had no rational framework to understand. It was during one of these moments of quiet communion with the inexplicable that Elena noticed something strange. Her compass, which she had placed on a flat rock beside her equipment, was spinning slowly, the needle refusing to settle on magnetic north. She picked it up, examined it, walked 20 feet away. The compass worked perfectly. She returned to the formation. The needle began spinning again. Electromagnetic anomaly, Elena thought. The stone must contain unusual mineral deposits that interfered with magnetic fields. She made a note to test for magnetite concentrations, though nothing in her initial mineralogical analysis had suggested anything unusual. As the sun began to set that day, painting the Nevada desert in shades of orange and gold, Elena made a decision that went against every safety protocol she had followed throughout her career. She decided to stay the night alone, to camp beside the formation, to see if the desert darkness would reveal anything that daylight had hidden. She had provisions for several days, a satellite phone for emergencies, and enough scientific equipment to keep herself occupied if sleep didn't come. But more than that, she had an inexplicable feeling, not quite intuition, not quite premonition, but something that felt like a certainty she couldn't name, that tonight, something significant would happen. Elena had never been a superstitious person. She believed in evidence, in measurement, in the scientific method. She had left behind the casual Catholicism of her childhood decades ago, finding more truth in the testimony of rocks than in the promises of priests. She was rational, skeptical, methodical in her thinking. And yet, as she watched the stars emerge in the crystalline desert sky, she felt herself filled with an anticipation she couldn't justify, a sense that her entire life had been preparing her for whatever was about to unfold in this remote place where ancient stone held secrets that mainstream science refused to acknowledge. She made a simple dinner on her camp stove, checked her equipment one final time, and settled into her sleeping bag as the temperature dropped with the sudden coldness that desert nights bring. She lay there for a long time, looking up at the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, thinking about how small she was, how brief her life was compared to the ancient stones she studied, how little humanity really understood about its own past. And then, at exactly 2:47 in the morning according to her watch, Elena woke to a sound she had never heard before in her life. It wasn't the wind moving through the desert. It wasn't an animal or an aircraft or any mechanical source she could identify. It was something that seemed to exist at the edge of perception, almost more of a feeling than a sound, a vibration that resonated through her body as much as through her ears. It sounded almost like singing, like humming, like a frequency that her consciousness recognized even though her mind had no reference point for it. Elena sat up in her sleeping bag, her heart racing, her scientific training warring with an instinctive response that felt older than thought. There was light outside her tent, not the harsh beam of a flashlight, not the flicker of flame, but a soft, steady luminescence that seemed to have no visible source. For several long seconds, Elena sat frozen, her rational mind scrambling for explanations. Headlights from a distant vehicle? But she was 4 to 7 miles from the nearest road. Lightning from a storm? But the sky had been perfectly clear. Some kind of chemical reaction in the rocks themselves, phosphorescence triggered by the cooling night air? Even as she tried to convince herself of mundane explanations, Elena knew that none of them fit what she was experiencing. This was something else. Something that her scientific framework had no category for. Something impossible. She unzipped her tent slowly, quietly, and emerged into the desert night. The air was cold against her face, crystalline and still. And standing beside the ancient stone formation, illuminated by that sourceless light, was a figure that made every assumption Elena had ever held about reality shatter like glass. The being was tall, approximately 6 feet 4 inches, with proportions that were humanoid but distinctly not human. The body was slender, almost fragile in appearance, with long limbs and a graceful posture that suggested effortless balance. The head was larger than a human head, more elongated, with features that seemed to exist somewhere between the familiar and the alien. Large eyes that dominated the face, a nose that was present but subtle, a mouth that was small and expressive. But what struck Elena most profoundly was not the being's appearance but the quality of presence it radiated. There was an intelligence in those large, dark eyes that felt ancient and compassionate, curious and patient. There was no threat in the being's posture, no aggression, no fear. Just a calm watchfulness, as if the being had been waiting for Elena to wake, had been expecting her. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, they simply looked at each other, the human scientist and the impossible visitor. Elena felt her heartbeat slow from its initial panic, felt her breathing deepen, felt something in her consciousness shifting to accommodate this new reality that her rational mind insisted couldn't exist. And then, without any movement of the being's mouth, without any sound in the external world, Elena heard a voice as clear as if someone were standing right beside her, speaking directly into her mind. "You've been listening," the voice said, and it carried qualities that no human voice could contain. Layers of meaning, depths of emotion, harmonics of intention that communicated far more than words alone. Finally, someone listens. Finally, someone remembers how to hear. Elena opened her mouth to speak, to ask the questions that were crowding her mind. But before she could form words, the voice continued. "I am Kaylin. And I am home. After so long, after so many years counting time in ways your species doesn't yet measure, I am finally home." The word hung in the air between them, impossible and undeniable. Home. This being, this visitor from somewhere beyond Earth, was calling this place home. Calling Elena's planet home. I don't understand, Elena managed to say aloud, her voice sounding strange to her own ears in the desert silence. "You're from Earth." The being, Kaylin, tilted its head in a gesture that was eerily familiar, almost human in its expressiveness. "I was born here," the telepathic voice replied, and Elena could sense layers of emotion beneath the words. Nostalgia, longing, sorrow, joy, all woven together. Born in what you now call Nevada, though the landscape was different then. Born on this planet long before your species began counting its generations. Elena felt her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. She sat down on the sandy ground, not caring about the cold or the small rocks digging into her skin, needing the solid earth beneath her because everything else, every certainty, every assumption, was spinning away into impossible space. How long ago? She heard herself ask, her scientific training asserting itself even in the midst of impossibility. If she was going to have a conversation with a telepathic alien who claimed Earth as birthplace, she was at least going to get specific data. Kaylin moved then, walking with that same uncanny grace to stand beside the ancient stone formation, placing one long-fingered hand against the carved surface. And as Elena watched, the symbols she had been studying for weeks began to glow with the same soft luminescence that surrounded Kaylin's form, as if the stone were recognizing the touch of its creator, responding to a signal it had been waiting over 100,000 years to receive. By your current calendar system, Kaylin said, approximately 127,000 years ago. That is when I was born, here, in a civilization your species has no memory of, no archaeological evidence for, no historical record of. A civilization that thrived for thousands of years before disaster came and changed everything. Elena felt her mind reeling. 127,000 years. That placed Kaylin's birth during the late Pleistocene epoch, when early Homo sapiens were just beginning to develop the cognitive and cultural capabilities that would eventually lead to modern human civilization. It was a time before agriculture, before writing, before any of the great ancient civilizations that historians acknowledged. It was effectively prehistoric from the perspective of human knowledge. But that's impossible, Elena said, and even as the words left her mouth, she knew how absurd they sounded. She was talking to a being who was communicating telepathically while making ancient stones glow with light. Clearly, her understanding of what was possible needed radical revision. Kaylin turned those enormous eyes toward her, and Elena saw something in their depths that looked almost like compassion, almost like understanding of the cognitive vertigo she was experiencing. I understand your confusion, Kaylin said gently. Your species has been taught that it is the first and only intelligent life to evolve on this planet. That the archaeological record is complete. That the geological record tells you everything you need to know about Earth's past. But Elena Chen, what if I told you that the record is incomplete? What if I told you that civilizations can rise and fall leaving almost no trace? What if I told you that your species is not Earth's first attempt at consciousness, but its second? The implications crashed over Elena like a wave. She struggled to process what Kaylin was suggesting. That humans weren't the original intelligent species on Earth. That something, someone, had come before. That the planet she had studied her entire life held secrets far deeper than anything mainstream geology acknowledged. If you were born 127,000 years ago, Elena said slowly, working through the logic, then you should be dead. Nothing lives that long. Even if your species has radically different biology than humans, there are thermodynamic limits to how long complex biological systems can maintain organization. Unless. She paused, a possibility occurring to her that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her conscious reasoning, almost as if the thought were being placed in her mind from an external source. Unless time doesn't work the way I think it does, she finished quietly. Kaylin made a sound that might have been approval, though it came through telepathically rather than vocally. Now you're beginning to understand. I was born 127,000 years ago. Yes. But I am not 127,000 years old. I am 4 to 7 years old by the subjective measurement of time I have personally experienced. Because I left Earth when I was 23, and time flows very differently for those who travel at velocities approaching the speed of light. Time dilation. Elena's mind seized on the physics concept she remembered from undergraduate courses. Einstein's special relativity predicted that time would pass more slowly for objects moving at high velocities relative to stationary observers. It was a proven effect, measured in particle accelerators and GPS satellites. But the magnitude Kaylin was describing, experiencing only 24 years while 100,000 years passed on Earth, would require velocities so close to light speed that the energy requirements would be astronomical. You can travel that fast? Elena asked, understanding that she was accepting the premises of this conversation even as part of her mind screamed that she must be hallucinating, that this couldn't be real, that she had fallen asleep and was dreaming with unusual vividness. My civilization could, Kaylin corrected. The civilization that existed here, on Earth, long before humans began their journey toward consciousness. We reached technological capabilities that your species is just beginning to imagine. We learned to fold space-time, to move through the universe at velocities that made time itself elastic. And some of us, small groups of explorers and scientists, left Earth to study other worlds, to understand the broader cosmos, to see what existed beyond our birthplace. Kalen's hand was still resting on the glowing stone, and as Elena watched, images began to form in the luminescence. Not quite holographic projections, but something more direct, more vivid, as if the stone itself were remembering and sharing its memories. She saw landscapes that looked like Earth but weren't quite Earth as she knew it. She saw structures that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it. Organic forms that nevertheless served as buildings, as technology, as art. She saw beings like Kalen moving through environments that balanced nature and civilization in ways Elena had never imagined possible. And she saw something else that made her breath catch in her throat. She saw beings that looked almost human, not quite but close, living alongside Kalen's species, integrated into the civilization rather than separate from it. What are they? Elena whispered, pointing at these proto-human figures in the stone's memory. Kalen's telepathic voice carried profound weight when it answered. They are your ancestors, Elena. The descendants of my people and another hominid species that existed on Earth during that time. They are the result of genetic integration between two intelligent lineages. They are the bridge between my species and yours. The words hung in the cold desert air, their implications too vast for Elena to fully process. If what Kalen was saying was true, and Elena was rapidly running out of reasons to doubt the testimony of her own senses, then human beings were not simply the product of natural selection acting on primate ancestors. They were the children of a far older, far more advanced civilization that had existed on Earth and then vanished, leaving behind only fragments and echoes and descendants who had forgotten everything. What happened? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened to your civilization? Why is there no archaeological evidence? Why don't we remember? Kalen was silent for a long moment, and Elena sensed that whatever answer was coming carried pain for the being, that these were memories that hurt despite the vast stretches of time that separated past from present. Catastrophe, Kalen finally said. Multiple catastrophes, actually, occurring within a relatively short span. A massive solar flare that our protective technology failed to adequately shield against. Electromagnetic pulses that destroyed most of our sophisticated systems. Volcanic eruptions triggered by crustal displacement. Climate shifts so rapid and severe that ecosystems collapsed within generations. And in the chaos that followed, with our technology failing, with our population decimated, with survival becoming the only priority, civilization simply unwound. The images in the stone shifted, showing destruction on a scale Elena could barely comprehend. She saw cities falling silent, their organic structures dying without the consciousness that animated them. She saw populations scattered, knowledge lost, technology reverting to simpler and simpler forms with each generation that had to focus entirely on survival rather than transmission of wisdom. Those of us who had left Earth, Kalen continued, were too far away to help. By the time we realized that communication from home had ceased, by the time we could turn our ships around and begin the journey back, tens of thousands of years had passed here. And when probes finally reached Earth again, everything had changed. My civilization was gone. The cities had crumbled and been absorbed back into geology. The technology had degraded into indistinguishable organic matter. And the descendants, the hybrid children who carried genetic material from both my people and the hominids we had integrated with, had regressed to a state that your anthropologists would classify as prehistoric. Elena felt tears on her face, though she couldn't have said exactly what she was crying for. For a lost civilization? For a forgotten heritage? For the profound loneliness that Kalen must have felt, returning home to find everything changed beyond recognition? But if that's true, Elena said, working through the implications, if humans are descended from your species and early hominids, then we should carry genetic evidence. There should be DNA sequences that don't fit the primate lineage. There should be. She trailed off because Kalen was nodding in that eerily human gesture, and Elena realized with a shock what the being was about to say before the telepathic words came. There is, Elena. Your geneticists have found anomalous DNA in modern humans. Sequences that don't have clear evolutionary pathways. Genes that appear to have been introduced rather than developed gradually. They call it DNA from unknown hominid populations because they don't have a framework for what it really represents. But those sequences are my people's legacy. They are the evidence that you carry within every cell of your body that you are not purely earthborn in the way you've been taught, but the children of a civilization that reached for the stars and then fell back to the ground. Elena felt her heart racing. She knew, somehow, what Kaylin was about to say. It was there in the careful build-up, in the weight that Kaylin's telepathic voice carried when speaking of teachers and prophets. It was there in the whole context of this conversation about forgotten civilizations and dormant abilities and humanity's hidden potential. You're going to tell me about Jesus, Elena said. Not a question but a statement. Kaylin's large eyes reflected the starlight, and Elena saw something in them that looked like sadness mixed with hope, compassion mixed with urgency. Yes, Kaylin said simply. I'm going to tell you the truth about Jesus of Nazareth. Who he really was. Where he really came from. What he was really trying to teach humanity before his message was hijacked by institutions more interested in control than liberation. And why understanding this truth now, at this moment in human history, might be the difference between your species awakening to its full potential or sleepwalking into extinction. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of sage and ancient stone. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its voice carrying across the vast emptiness. And Elena Chen, geologist, scientist, rationalist, sat in the Nevada desert in the middle of the night, looking at an impossible being who claimed Earth as birthplace, and prepared to hear revelations that would change everything she thought she understood about religion, spirituality, and the true history of human consciousness. Tell me, she said quietly. Tell me everything. Kaylin stood, that fluid movement that seemed to defy Earth's gravity, and gestured for Elena to follow. They walked together to the ancient stone formation, and as they approached, the symbols carved into its surface began to glow more brightly, as if responding to their proximity, as if awakening from a long sleep to bear witness to the conversation about to unfold. Before I tell you about Jesus, Kaylin began, I need you to understand something fundamental about consciousness itself. Your species has been taught to think of consciousness as a byproduct of brain activity, as an emergent property of sufficient neural complexity. You've been taught that you are biological machines that somehow generate the subjective experience of awareness. But this is backwards, Elena. Consciousness is not produced by matter. Matter is produced by consciousness. Elena felt her scientific training rebelling against this statement, but she forced herself to listen, to consider possibilities that her education had never explored. Think of it this way, Kaylin continued, and Elena felt information flowing into her mind. Not just words but conceptual frameworks, visual models, understanding that bypassed normal learning processes. What your physicists call the quantum field, the fundamental substrate of reality from which particles emerge, is not unconscious energy. It is consciousness itself. Pure, undifferentiated consciousness. And what you experience as physical reality is consciousness taking form, solidifying into patterns you interpret as matter, energy, space, and time. Kaylin touched the stone again, and the glowing symbols rearranged themselves into something that looked like a map or a diagram, showing nested layers of reality, each one emerging from the layer beneath it. At the deepest level, Kaylin explained, there is only consciousness, what some human traditions call source, or God, or the ground of being. This consciousness is everything and everywhere simultaneously. It has no boundaries, no limitations, no separation. And from this unified consciousness, through a process your mystics have called the divine creative act, individual expressions of consciousness emerge. Souls. You, Elena Chen, are one such expression. I am another. Every human being, every living thing, every particle of matter, all are consciousness taking temporary, individualized form. Elena struggled to integrate this with her scientific understanding. But that sounds like mysticism, not physics. How does that explain anything about Jesus? Because Jesus, Kaylin said, and his telepathic voice carried a quality of profound reverence, was a consciousness that understood this truth completely. Not intellectually, but experientially. He knew, at the deepest level of his being, that he and the Source were one. That there was no separation between his individual consciousness and the universal consciousness that creates and sustains all reality. And this understanding gave him abilities that seemed miraculous to those who didn't comprehend the mechanism. The symbols on the stone shifted again, and Elena saw an image forming. A figure that could only be Jesus, standing among a crowd, his hands extended towards someone who appeared to be sick or injured. When Jesus healed people, Kalen continued, he wasn't asking an external God to intervene. He wasn't performing magic or suspending natural laws. He was doing something far more profound and far more reproducible. He was aligning his consciousness completely with the highest frequency of love, which is the fundamental creative frequency of the universe, and allowing that frequency to flow through him to the person in need. And because consciousness creates reality at the quantum level, this high-frequency love literally reorganized the matter, energy, and information patterns that were creating the disease. Elena watched the image in the stone, seeing energy, or something like energy, something her eyes shouldn't be able to perceive but somehow could through whatever Kalen was doing to expand her perceptual capacities, flowing from Jesus to the sick person. And as the energy made contact, she saw the person's body responding, cells reorganizing, disease patterns dissolving, health emerging as naturally as a flower opening to sunlight. This is what your churches have hidden, Kalen said, and Elena could hear both sadness and frustration in the telepathic transmission. They teach that Jesus was uniquely divine, that he was the only Son of God, that his abilities were exclusive to him because of his special supernatural nature. But that was never what Jesus himself taught. He said, explicitly and repeatedly, that everything he did, his followers could do also. He said that the kingdom of God is within each person. He said that humans are gods, children of the Most High. He was not claiming to be special. He was demonstrating what becomes possible when any human fully remembers their true nature as consciousness individualized from Source. The implications were staggering. Elena felt her worldview, built on decades of scientific materialism, shaped by a childhood of Catholic teachings that she had intellectually rejected but emotionally never fully released, crumbling and reforming into something vastly larger, vastly more hopeful. But if that's true, Elena said slowly, if Jesus was teaching that humans could develop the same abilities he demonstrated, then why did Christianity become a religion of powerlessness? Why do churches teach that we're sinners who need external salvation rather than gods who forgot their own divinity? Kalen's expression, difficult to read on features so different from human, yet somehow conveying clear emotion, looked pained. Because institutions that derive power from being intermediaries between humans and the divine cannot afford for humans to discover direct access. If people understood that they could heal themselves, that they could commune directly with Source consciousness, that they carried divine power within their own awareness, they wouldn't need priests or churches or elaborate religious hierarchies. The institution would become obsolete. The stone's images shifted, showing a rapid historical progression. Elena saw early followers of Jesus practicing direct techniques for consciousness expansion. She saw communities healing each other, developing telepathic abilities, demonstrating powers over matter. And then she saw the change, the Roman Empire adopting Christianity, councils of bishops deciding which texts were scripture and which were heresy, the systematic suppression of gospels that taught direct knowledge in favor of texts that emphasized human sinfulness and need for institutional mediation. The Gnostic Christians, Kalen explained, understood Jesus' real message. They taught gnosis, direct experimental knowledge of the divine within. They practiced techniques for consciousness expansion. They demonstrated abilities similar to what Jesus had shown. And for this, they were hunted down and destroyed. Their texts were burned. Their communities were scattered. The institutional church could not allow the knowledge to survive that humans didn't need the church to access their own divinity. Elena felt anger rising in her chest, a fury at the magnitude of the deception, at the centuries of human potential that had been suppressed in service of institutional power. So everything I was taught about Jesus was a lie. Not a lie, Kalen corrected gently. A distortion. Jesus did teach love, but not as a moral instruction but as a technology. He did teach that God is Father, but not as an external authority but as the source from which all consciousness emerges. He did teach salvation, but not as rescue from punishment but as awakening from the illusion of separation. The core truths were there, Elena. They were just buried beneath layers of interpretation designed to maintain control rather than facilitate liberation. Kaelin moved closer to Elena, those large eyes filled with something that looked remarkably like compassion. And this is why I'm here. Why many of us are returning to Earth now. Because humanity has reached a critical threshold. Your species is approaching a point where you could destroy yourselves, through environmental collapse, through nuclear war, through any number of catastrophes that emerge from a consciousness of separation and fear. Or you could wake up. You could remember what Jesus and other teachers tried to show you. You could activate the dormant abilities that are your birthright as consciousness individualized from source. Other teachers? Elena asked, seizing on that detail. You're saying Jesus wasn't unique? That there were others who understood this truth? Many others, Kaelin confirmed. In different cultures, different times, different contexts. Buddha, who taught that suffering comes from the illusion of separate self and that enlightenment is remembering your true nature. Krishna, who demonstrated divine abilities and taught that the divine dwells within all beings. Lao Tzu, who spoke of the Tao, the nameless source from which all things emerge. Indigenous shamans who could heal and communicate with spirits and traverse dimensions. Mystics in every tradition who accessed direct knowledge of ultimate reality. The stone showed a rapid montage of figures across human history. Some Elena recognized, others she didn't, all demonstrating abilities that mainstream history dismissed as legend or superstition. But Jesus, Kaelin continued, was particularly significant because of his historical moment and his genetic heritage. He appeared at a time when your species was developing the communication technologies and social structures that would eventually allow global transmission of teachings. And his genetics. Elena. This is where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Kaelin's hand touched the stone again, and the image shifted to show a woman, clearly human, dressed in ancient Middle Eastern clothing, her features Semitic and beautiful in their ordinariness. This is Mary, Kaelin said. Jesus' mother. What your religious traditions call the Virgin Mary. Elena recognized the image from countless paintings and sculptures she had seen throughout her life, though this version looked more real, more human, less idealized than artistic representations. The virgin birth story, Kaelin continued, is a misunderstood account of what actually happened. Mary was not a virgin in the literal sense. There was no supernatural conception. But she was virgin in a deeper sense. Her genetic line had been monitored and guided for generations specifically to produce someone whose DNA could serve as a vessel for a highly advanced consciousness to incarnate. Elena felt a chill run through her. You're saying Jesus was genetically engineered? Not in the crude sense of laboratory manipulation, Kaelin clarified. But yes, in the sense that certain genetic lineages carry stronger connections to source consciousness, stronger abilities to access dormant human potential. Mary's ancestors had been part of mystery schools, secret traditions that preserved knowledge of consciousness technologies. They practiced meditation, energy work, healing. And over generations, this practice created epigenetic changes that made their genetic line particularly suitable for what was about to happen. The image showed Mary as a young woman, in meditation, her body surrounded by the same kind of energy field Elena had seen around Jesus in earlier images. A consciousness that had transcended the need for physical incarnation, Kaelin explained, a being from my people's lineage who had evolved far beyond biological limitation, made the choice to incarnate into human form one more time. To be born as a human baby, to grow up experiencing all the limitations and vulnerabilities of physical existence, but carrying within that human form the full memory and capability of an ascended master. Jesus was one of you, Elena breathed. One of your people, incarnated in human form. Yes and no, Kaelin said. The consciousness that animated Jesus was from our evolutionary lineage, a soul that had originated on Earth in my civilization's time, that had lived many lives, that had evolved through multiple dimensions of existence, and that chose to return. But the physical body was human. The DNA was human, enhanced with certain activated sequences, but still human. Jesus was a bridge, advanced consciousness in human form, demonstrating what becomes possible when humanity's dormant potential is fully activated. Elena's mind raced through the implications. So when he performed miracles, healing the sick, walking on water, multiplying food, even resurrecting from death, he was demonstrating natural human abilities operating at full capacity. Exactly, Kaylin confirmed. And this is the crucial point that got lost. Jesus said, repeatedly, "These things that I do, you will do also, and greater things than these." He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was giving technical specifications. He was saying, this is what human consciousness can do when you remember who you really are, when you operate from love instead of fear, when you align with source instead of identifying with the limited ego self. The stone's images shifted to show Jesus' teaching, and Elena found herself able to understand the Aramaic words even though she had never studied the language. Kaylin was translating directly into her consciousness, bypassing normal linguistic processing. She heard Jesus say, "The kingdom of God is within you." Not in heaven after death, but within, accessible now, in this present moment. She heard him say, "I and the Father are one." Not claiming exclusive divinity, but stating a truth available to all consciousness, that at the deepest level, there is no separation between individual awareness and universal source. She heard him say, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." Not about belief in external deity, but about quantum certainty, absolute knowing that consciousness can direct physical reality. Faith, in Jesus's usage, Kaylin explained, didn't mean belief without evidence. It meant absolute conviction at the consciousness level that what you intend is already real. When he cursed the fig tree and it withered, he wasn't angry. He was demonstrating that focused intention, whether positive or negative, manifests in physical reality. When he multiplied loaves and fishes, he wasn't performing magic. He was reorganizing matter at the quantum level through consciousness direction. When he walked on water, he was manipulating the relationship between his body's matter and water's matter through frequency adjustment. Elena's scientific mind wanted to reject this, but she was sitting in the desert with a being who shouldn't exist, watching ancient stones display images they shouldn't be able to generate, feeling information downloading directly into her consciousness through means that science said were impossible. Her entire framework for what was real and what was possible had already shattered. Maybe it was time to build a new framework. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Don't just tell me. If these abilities are real, if they're natural human potential, show me. Demonstrate something. Make me believe not just with words but with evidence." Kaylin looked at her for a long moment, those enormous eyes seeming to peer into depths of her consciousness that Elena hadn't known existed. Then, slowly, the being nodded. "Yes," Kaylin said. "You need direct experience, not just conceptual understanding. This is wise. This is scientific. So let me show you 3 demonstrations. First, telepathy, direct mind-to-mind communication. Second, healing, consciousness reorganizing physical matter. Third, manifestation, bringing form into existence through intention. These were all abilities Jesus demonstrated routinely. And these are all abilities you possess in dormant form, waiting to be activated. Kaylin walked a short distance away, perhaps 30 feet, and turned to face Elena. "For the first demonstration, I will not use telepathy. I will think a sequence of information, and you will receive it through consciousness connection. But I want you to recognize that you are already doing this. You simply haven't been trained to distinguish between your own thoughts and information coming from external sources." Elena felt skeptical, but also curious. She had spent her entire life trusting sensory evidence, empirical data, reproducible results. If Kaylin could demonstrate something measurable, something that couldn't be explained as coincidence or clever trickery, then maybe, just maybe, everything else the being had said could be true. "Close your eyes," Kaylin instructed telepathically. "Take 3 deep breaths. And then simply observe your thoughts without attachment, as if you were watching clouds pass through a clear sky. Note which thoughts have the quality of your own mental voice and which have a different quality, clearer, quieter, more certain. Elena did as instructed. She closed her eyes, feeling the cold desert air on her face, hearing the vast silence of the Nevada wilderness broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through sage. She breathed deeply, trying to quiet her mind's constant chatter. At first, there was only the familiar stream of her own thinking, analyzing, questioning, doubting. But then, gradually, she noticed something else. Thoughts that didn't quite feel like her own thoughts. They had a different texture, a different origin point. Not coming from her internal dialogue but arriving fully formed, complete, with a clarity her own thinking rarely possessed. She saw, not with her eyes but with some other faculty of perception, a number, 847. And immediately following the number, she understood its significance, August 4, 2007, the date she had successfully defended her doctoral dissertation, one of the most important days of her life. Then another image, a blue stone, polished smooth, with white veins running through it. And she knew, somehow, that this was a specific stone she had found on a beach in Oregon during a family vacation when she was 9 years old. A stone she had kept for years before losing it during a move, a stone she hadn't thought about in decades. Then a third piece of information, a phrase in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow she understood its meaning, the seeker becomes the found. Elena's eyes snapped open. Kaylin was standing in the exact position where she had last seen the being, hadn't moved, hadn't spoken aloud. Yet Elena had received 3 specific pieces of information that she couldn't possibly have generated herself. The number 847, she said, her voice shaking slightly. That was the date of my dissertation defense. But I never told you that. I never thought about it consciously while we've been talking. You didn't need to think about it consciously, Kaylin replied. Your memory contains that information, and through our consciousness connection, I could perceive it. I selected a detail that was significant to you but not at the forefront of your awareness, to demonstrate that this is not mind-reading in the sense of hearing conscious thoughts, but accessing the broader field of consciousness that contains all your memories, experiences, and knowledge. And the stone, Elena continued, the blue stone with white veins. I found that when I was 9, and I haven't thought about it in 30 years. How could you possibly know about that? Because that memory is part of your consciousness field, Kaylin explained patiently. Nothing is ever truly forgotten, Elena. Every experience, every moment, every detail of your life exists as information in your consciousness. Most of it is not in active awareness, but it's all there, all accessible if you know how to perceive it. This is how Jesus could know things about people he had never met. He was reading their consciousness fields, perceiving information that was part of their being even if they weren't consciously thinking about it. Elena felt her worldview expanding painfully, like a too small container being forced to hold more than it was designed for. Everything Kaylin was describing had implications that cascaded outward endlessly. If consciousness could communicate directly, if memories could be accessed telepathically, if information existed in fields that transcended individual minds, then what else was possible? What other supposedly supernatural abilities were simply natural capacities that humans had forgotten how to use? The third thing you showed me, Elena said, that phrase, the seeker becomes the found. What was that? Kaylin made that gesture that Elena was beginning to recognize as pleasure or approval. That was not something from your memory. That was information I transmitted to you directly, to demonstrate that telepathy works in both directions. You received a concept that originated in my consciousness, translated it into language your mind could process, and understood its meaning even though the words came from a linguistic framework that doesn't exist in any human language. Elena sat down on the cold ground, needing the solidity of earth beneath her because everything else felt like it was floating away. This is real, she whispered. This is actually real. You just demonstrated telepathy, and I received information I couldn't possibly have known, and this changes everything I understand about human capabilities. Yes, Kaylin said simply. And we have only begun. That was the first demonstration, consciousness communicating across space without physical medium. Now for the second demonstration, which Jesus performed more frequently than any other, healing. Kaylin walked back to where Elena sat and knelt beside her with that uncanny grace. For this demonstration, I need you to trust me and to cooperate actively. I'm going to perform a small injury on yourself, and then I will guide you through the process of healing it using the same technique Jesus used. This way you won't just observe healing, you'll experience it directly, you'll perform it yourself, and you'll know beyond any doubt that this capacity is real and accessible. Elena felt a flutter of fear. Deliberately injuring herself seemed counterintuitive, even dangerous. But she had come this far, had accepted revelations that shattered her entire understanding of reality. What was one more step into the impossible? What do you need me to do? She asked. Kaylin reached into a pouch. Elena hadn't noticed the being carrying anything, but suddenly the pouch was there, made of material that looked like leather but with a quality that suggested it had never been part of any animal, and withdrew something that looked like a small crystal blade. This is sterilized and will create a clean incision, Kaylin explained. I want you to make a small cut on your forearm. Nothing deep, nothing dangerous, just enough to break the skin and create a wound that would normally take several days to heal. Elena took the crystal blade. It felt warm in her hand, almost alive, vibrating with a subtle frequency she could feel against her palm. With her scientific training overriding her instinctive hesitation, she made a quick, shallow cut across her left forearm. Blood welled immediately, and she felt the sharp sting of pain that any injury brought. Good, Kaylin said. Now, look at the wound. Observe it carefully. Note its exact dimensions, the depth of the cut, the rate of bleeding. Create a precise mental image of the injury as it exists right now. Elena did so, cataloging the wound with the same observational precision she brought to geological specimens. The cut was approximately 2 inches long, perhaps 1/8 of an inch deep, bleeding steadily but not severely. Now, Kaylin continued, I'm going to guide you through a process that Jesus used constantly. Place your right hand over the wound but don't touch it. Keep your palm about an inch above the cut. Close your eyes, and focus your attention not on your hand but on your heart, the physical organ in your chest. Elena followed the instructions, feeling slightly foolish but committed to the experiment. She positioned her hand above the wound and brought her attention to her heart, feeling it beating steadily in her chest. Your heart, Kaylin's telepathic voice came, soft and guiding, is not just a pump. It is a generator of an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond your physical body. This field is measurable. Your own scientists have documented this, though they don't yet understand its full implications. When you focus attention on your heart while simultaneously generating the frequency of love, this field becomes a carrier wave for consciousness intention. This is the mechanism of healing that Jesus used. Elena concentrated on her heart, trying to follow Kaylin's instructions. But something was missing. She felt her heartbeat, yes, but she wasn't experiencing anything unusual, any special frequency or field. You're trying too hard, Kaylin observed. You're thinking about it, trying to make it happen through mental effort. But this doesn't come from the thinking mind. Let me guide you differently. Remember a moment when you felt pure love, not romantic love necessarily, but unconditional love, deep connection, profound gratitude. For many humans, the birth of a child triggers this state, or a moment with a beloved pet, or experiencing profound beauty in nature. Find that memory, Elena. Let yourself feel it again. Elena's mind went immediately to the moment each of her daughters had been born. She remembered holding Sophia for the first time, that tiny perfect being, feeling a love so overwhelming that she had wept with the intensity of it. A love that asked nothing, that needed nothing, that simply existed as pure connection between souls. As the memory came back, Elena felt something shift in her chest. A warmth, a fullness, an expansion that was physical but also more than physical. Her heart felt like it was growing, opening, radiating something outward. Yes, Kaylin said, and Elena could hear satisfaction in the telepathic voice. That's it. That's the frequency. Now, maintain that feeling, that state of unconditional love, and direct it consciously toward your wound. Imagine the love energy flowing from your heart, down your arm, through your hand, into the injured tissue. Not forcing it, but allowing it to flow naturally, like water finding its path. Elena did as instructed, holding the memory of her daughter's birth, feeling the love it generated, and directing that feeling toward her bleeding forearm. For perhaps a minute, nothing seemed to happen. But then she felt something, a warmth in her right palm, a tingling sensation that seemed to extend beyond her physical hand into the space above the wound. "Open your eyes," Kaylin said quietly. "But maintain the love state. Don't drop back into analytical mind. Keep feeling while you observe." Elena opened her eyes and looked at her forearm. What she saw made her gasp. The wound was closing. Not slowly, not over days as natural healing would require, but visibly, in real time. She watched as the edges of the cut drew together, as new tissue formed, as the bleeding stopped and the skin sealed itself. Within 3 minutes, the wound was completely closed. Not even a scar remained. Just smooth, healthy skin where moments before there had been an open cut. I did that," Elena whispered, staring at her arm in shock. "I healed it. With my consciousness. With love." "Yes," Kaylin confirmed. "You performed the same type of healing that Jesus performed on countless people. The only difference is that Jesus could do it instantly, because his love frequency was constant and powerful, fully activated through years of practice and conscious development. You took 3 minutes because you're just learning, because you had to work to generate and maintain the love state. But the mechanism is identical. You just proved to yourself that consciousness can direct physical matter, that love is not a sentiment but an actual energetic force capable of reorganizing biology." Elena touched her arm where the wound had been, running her fingers over skin that showed no sign of injury. The blood on her arm was still there, evidence that the wound had been real. But the cut itself was gone, healed in a time frame that should have been impossible. "Jesus said that faith could move mountains," Kaylin continued. "He didn't mean belief in the sense of hoping something was true. He meant absolute certainty at the consciousness level, unwavering knowing that what you intend is already real. When you heal, you're not asking for healing to happen. You're knowing that it's happening. You're aligning your consciousness with the reality where healing exists, and physical tissue responds to that consciousness direction. This is quantum mechanics, Elena. The observer doesn't just observe reality. The observer creates reality through the act of observation, through the quality of consciousness brought to the moment." Elena felt tears running down her face, though she couldn't have said whether they were tears of joy, or fear, or simple overwhelm at experiencing something that fundamentally contradicted everything her scientific education had taught her about how reality works. "One more demonstration," Kaylin said gently. "And then you'll have experienced the 3 primary categories of ability that Jesus demonstrated most frequently. Telepathy, consciousness communicating. Healing, consciousness reorganizing biology. And now, manifestation, consciousness directing matter at the quantum level to create physical form." Kaylin stood and walked to a clear patch of ground a few feet away. The being knelt and gestured for Elena to join. When she did, Kaylin smoothed the sandy soil into a flat surface. "Place 3 small stones here," Kaylin instructed. "Any 3 stones, doesn't matter their size or type." Elena looked around and found 3 pebbles nearby, each about the size of a quarter. She placed them on the smoothed ground in a triangular pattern. "Now," Kaylin said, "I want you to use the same love frequency you just accessed for healing, but this time direct it toward a different intention. I want you to focus on wanting a 4th stone to appear with these 3. Not believing it will appear, not hoping it will appear, but knowing with absolute certainty that it is appearing, that at the quantum level particles are reorganizing to manifest the form you're intending." Elena stared at the 3 stones. "You want me to create matter from nothing? That violates conservation of energy. That violates everything physics teaches." "Matter doesn't come from nothing," Kaylin corrected patiently. "Matter comes from the quantum field, the field of infinite potential that underlies physical reality. Your physicists already know this. They've demonstrated that particles emerge from quantum vacuum fluctuations. What they haven't recognized is that consciousness can influence which potentials collapse into actuality. This is what Jesus did when he multiplied loaves and fishes. He didn't create food from nothing. He collapsed quantum probability into specific physical forms through consciousness intention. It sounded insane. It contradicted everything Elena had learned in her PhD program. But then again, she had just healed a wound in 3 minutes through focused love. Clearly, her education had left out some rather significant information about how reality actually works. How do I do it? She asked. Same process as healing, Kaylin guided. Access the love state through memory or gratitude. Once you feel your heart field expanding, hold a clear intention. In this case, the intention that a fourth stone appears with these 3. Don't visualize it appearing, because that puts it in the future. See it already there, already real, and feel gratitude for its existence. Maintain this state for at least 10 minutes. Quantum collapse requires sustained consciousness focus, especially when you're first learning. Elena closed her eyes, brought back the memory of her daughter's birth, felt the love frequency generating in her chest. Once she had it established, she added the intention, not I want a fourth stone, but there is a fourth stone, it exists, I'm grateful for it. She held this state, this strange combination of feeling and knowing, for what felt like a very long time. Her knees hurt from kneeling on the hard ground. Her mind kept trying to wander into doubt and analysis. But each time she noticed her attention drifting, she gently brought it back to the love feeling and the certainty knowing. After what she estimated was 15 minutes, though she had lost precise track of time, Elena felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just a subtle sense of completion, like a process finishing itself. She opened her eyes. 4 stones lay on the smoothed ground. Elena blinked, looked again, counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 stones where she had placed 3. The new stone was identical in size and color to the others, sitting beside them as if it had always been there. With shaking hands, Elena picked up the 4th stone. It was real, solid, cool to the touch. She turned it over in her palm, examining it with a geologist's trained eye. It showed the same weathering patterns, the same mineral composition, the same characteristics as the other 3. By any test she could perform, this was an ordinary stone that had existed for thousands of years. Except that 20 minutes ago, it hadn't existed at all. I created this, Elena whispered. I manifested matter through consciousness. You collapsed quantum probability into specific physical form, Kaylin corrected. The potential for this stone existed in the quantum field. You provided the consciousness intention that caused that potential to actualize. This is the mechanism behind every manifestation miracle ever recorded. Moses creating water from rock. Jesus multiplying food. Saints whose bodies didn't decay after death. All of it is consciousness directing matter according to principles that your science hasn't yet incorporated into its models. Elena sat back, the 4th stone still clutched in her hand, her entire understanding of reality fundamentally transformed. In the space of less than an hour, she had experienced telepathic communication, performed instant healing, and manifested matter through consciousness intention. 3 abilities that mainstream science said were impossible. 3 abilities that religious tradition attributed to supernatural intervention. 3 abilities that Jesus had demonstrated routinely. And 3 abilities that Kaylin insisted were natural human capacities, dormant in most people but accessible through proper training and understanding. Now you know, Kaylin said quietly, that when Jesus told his followers they would do greater works than he did, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was providing technical specifications. He was saying, I'm showing you what's possible with activated human consciousness. Now you go activate your own consciousness and do even more. But the church couldn't allow that message to survive in its pure form, because empowered humans don't need institutional mediation. So they changed the message from you can do this to only Jesus could do this because he was uniquely divine. Elena looked up at the stars, seeing them with completely new eyes. Each point of light was potentially a home to conscious beings, to civilizations that had discovered the same truths Jesus had taught, that had learned to use consciousness as the creative force it truly was. Why did they really kill him? Elena asked suddenly. Not the theological reasons, but the real reason. Why was Jesus such a threat that he had to be executed? Kalen's expression, that alien face that somehow conveyed very human emotions, looked sad. Because he was succeeding. Common people were starting to heal themselves, to manifest what they needed, to access direct knowledge without relying on temple authorities. The power structure saw its control slipping away. If Jesus's movement had continued unchecked, within a generation the entire religious and political order would have collapsed. People who can heal themselves don't need medical gatekeepers. People who can manifest resources don't need economic controllers. People who access source directly don't need religious intermediaries. Jesus threatened every power structure simultaneously. But he died, Elena said. They killed him. And after his death, his teachings were captured and controlled by exactly the kind of institutions he was threatening. Yes, Kalen agreed. From a certain perspective, the powers of his time won. They stopped his personal mission, killed his physical body, and eventually hijacked his message. But from another perspective, Jesus accomplished exactly what he intended. He demonstrated that consciousness transcends physical death, returning after crucifixion to prove that awareness continues beyond biological termination. He planted seeds of truth deep enough that they survived 2,000 years of distortion. And he established a template that would remain in human consciousness, waiting for the moment when humanity was ready to understand the real message. And you're saying that moment is now? Elena asked. Yes, Kalen confirmed. Humanity stands at a threshold. You're approaching technological capabilities that could either liberate or destroy your species. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nuclear weapons, climate manipulation, all of it requires a corresponding evolution of consciousness, or it will be used destructively. This is why beings like me are returning now. This is why individuals like you are being awakened to the truth about human potential. Because the next 20 years will determine whether your species transcends current limitations or succumbs to them. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, Elena realized. They had talked through the entire night, and dawn was approaching. She felt exhausted and energized simultaneously, drained by the revelations but lit up by possibilities she had never imagined. I have so many questions, Elena said. So much I still don't understand. About your civilization, about what happened to those who stayed on Earth, about the genetic connection between your people and humans, about what my role in all this is supposed to be. And I will answer all your questions, Kalen assured her. But first, you need rest. And I need continued healing. My injuries from the crash are significant, though your loving presence has already accelerated my recovery more than you know. Tomorrow night, we will continue. I will show you more of Earth's hidden history. I will teach you techniques for activating dormant capacities. And I will help you understand your specific purpose in the awakening that is beginning. Kalen stood, that movement that still looked like flowing despite the being's injured state, and began walking toward the ancient stone formation. Return to your camp. Sleep. Integrate what you've experienced. And when the sun sets tomorrow, come back here. The real education begins then. Elena watched as Kalen seemed to simply disappear into the stone formation itself, not walking behind it but merging with it somehow, as if the being's matter could phase through solid rock. She was alone again in the pre-dawn desert, the sky transitioning from star-filled black to the deep blue that precedes sunrise. Looking down at her hands, Elena saw the fourth stone still clutched in her palm, solid proof that the night's experiences had been real, not hallucination or dream. She opened her backpack and carefully wrapped the stone in a cloth, labeling it with date, location, and a single word, manifestation. As she walked back to her tent, Elena felt the first rays of sunrise touching the horizon. A new day was beginning. But more than that, a new understanding of what it meant to be human was dawning. And Elena Chen, geologist, scientist, rationalist, skeptic, was becoming something she had never imagined possible. A bridge between an ancient truth and a species that had forgotten how powerful it really was. She looked back at the stone formation one more time, seeing Kalen's words in the symbols that had puzzled her for months. You are gods. You have forgotten. Remember. Jesus had said the same thing 2,000 years ago, Elena realized. He had looked at ordinary people and called them gods, children of the Most High, capable of all the works he demonstrated and greater. And now, holding physical proof of consciousness manifesting matter in her hand, Elena understood that Jesus hadn't been speaking metaphorically or offering religious comfort. He had been providing technical specifications. He had been saying, "This is what you are. This is what you can do. Stop pretending to be powerless and remember your true nature." The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the Nevada desert with golden light. And Elena Chen stood in that light, transformed, awakened, ready to learn everything she had spent a lifetime forgetting. Over the next 3 nights, Kaylin revealed the complete truth about humanity's cosmic heritage. Elena learned that Jesus had been part of a coordinated mission involving multiple advanced consciousnesses: Buddha, Krishna, Lao Tzu, indigenous shamans, Christian mystics who were later persecuted, all incarnating at different times and places to demonstrate the same fundamental truth. Humans are divine consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation. Your species chose to forget, Kaylin explained on the second night. Before incarnating into physical form, every human soul agrees to temporary amnesia. You forget your divine nature, forget your connection to Source, forget your creative abilities. This forgetting creates the perfect conditions for consciousness to experience itself from a new perspective, to grow through challenge and limitation. But forgetting was never meant to be permanent, Kaylin continued. You were supposed to remember. That's why teachers like Jesus kept appearing, to trigger the remembering process. But institutions kept suppressing the awakening, kept humanity asleep, because sleeping people are easier to control. On the third night, Kaylin showed Elena her specific purpose. Using technology that Elena's mind couldn't fully comprehend, Kaylin displayed her genetic markers, the sequences inherited from the ancient Earth civilization that made her particularly capable of consciousness activation. You are what we call a wayshower, Kaylin explained. Not a savior, not a guru, but a living demonstration. As you activate your abilities, others will notice. Some will ask questions. You'll teach through example, not doctrine. You'll prove that these capacities are real by embodying them, and your students will prove it to their students. This is how awakening spreads, organically, exponentially, irresistibly. On the fourth day, Kaylin's ship arrived, a small craft that descended silently in the pre-dawn hours. The being's injuries had healed completely, accelerated by Elena's growing ability to generate healing frequencies. I must leave, Kaylin said, standing beside the ship as Elena fought tears she hadn't expected. But you're not alone. Others of my people are scattered across your world, making contact with wayshowers like yourself. And I've left you a gift. Kaylin placed a small crystal in Elena's palm. It pulsed with soft light, warm against her skin. This will allow you to receive guidance when you need it, Kaylin explained. Hold it during meditation, and you'll access the collective consciousness of those who have awakened. You'll never be truly alone again. They embraced, human and hybrid consciousness reunited across vast stretches of time, and then Kaylin entered the ship. Elena watched as it rose silently into the lightening sky, until it was just another star among millions, impossible to distinguish from the countless other points of light. But this star, Elena knew, carried her cosmic family home. And somehow, that made Earth feel less isolated, less alone in the universe. 3 months later, Elena Chen stood before a lecture hall at the University of Nevada, teaching a class on consciousness and geology, integrating ancient wisdom with modern science. The course had started with 12 students. Now, 6 weeks in, over 60 people crowded the room. Students, faculty, community members drawn by word of mouth about the professor who taught science in ways that opened doors to direct experience. Mainstream geology tells us that rocks are unconscious matter, Elena was saying. But what if consciousness isn't something that emerges from complex organization? What if consciousness is fundamental, and matter is consciousness taking temporary form? She placed her hands on a large piece of quartz sitting on the demonstration table. The class had seen her do this dozens of times now, but it still created a ripple of excitement. I'm not doing anything supernatural, Elena explained as the quartz began to glow softly, responding to her focused intention. I'm simply aligning my consciousness with the crystalline structure, matching frequencies. The glow you see is the result of resonance between biological and mineral fields. After class, 5 students lingered, the ones Elena recognized as carrying high concentrations of the genetic markers Kaylin had shown her. They didn't know this consciously, but they felt drawn to her teachings in ways that went beyond intellectual interest. Dr. Chen, one of them asked, a young woman named Maria, when you talk about consciousness directing matter, are you saying we could do what you just did? Make the crystal glow. Elena smiled. Not just could. You will. If you're willing to practice. I'm starting a study group for students who want to go deeper than lecture material allows. We meet Tuesday evenings. No grades, no academic credit. Just direct exploration of human potential. All 5 students showed up Tuesday evening. Elena taught them the same techniques Kaylin had taught her: heart-centered meditation, love frequency generation, consciousness focusing. Within 4 weeks, 3 of them could make quartz crystals glow. Within 8 weeks, 2 had demonstrated healing abilities on minor injuries. Within 12 weeks, all 5 had experienced telepathic communication with each other. How is this possible? Maria asked after successfully healing a burn on her hand in under 2 minutes. How did we never know we could do this? Because you were taught it was impossible, Elena replied simply. Your education, your culture, your religious institutions, all of them told you that miracles were supernatural events performed by special people. But miracles are just natural abilities operating at full capacity. Jesus tried to show humanity this truth. Now it's time for humanity to actually learn it. The group grew. 5 became 12. 12 became 30. Elena didn't advertise or recruit. People simply found their way to her, drawn by the same inexplicable pull that had led her to the stone formation in the Nevada desert. Some were scientists looking for frameworks that integrated consciousness with physics. Some were spiritual seekers tired of beliefs that demanded faith without evidence. Some were ordinary people who had always sensed they were capable of more than society allowed. All of them learned to access abilities that mainstream culture said didn't exist. And as they did, they became demonstration themselves, living proof that human potential extended far beyond conventional limitations. Elena's relationship with her daughters healed completely. The love frequency she now operated from dissolved decades of accumulated distance and resentment. Sophia and her sister Rebecca both attended the study groups, both developed abilities, both became teachers in their own right. Mom, Sophia said one evening after successfully manifesting a small crystal through focused intention, you've changed everything. Not just for us, but for everyone who learns this. Do you realize what you're doing? You're triggering the awakening that Jesus started 2,000 years ago. Elena shook her head gently. I'm not doing anything. The awakening is happening because it's time. I'm just one of thousands, maybe millions, who are remembering simultaneously. This is a species-wide shift, Sophia. We're living through the most significant transformation in human history. Now, 1 year after meeting Kaylin, Elena stood once again at the ancient stone formation. She came here monthly, treating it as a sacred site, a place of communion with truths larger than herself. She held the crystal Kaylin had given her, felt its pulse matching her heartbeat, and opened her consciousness to the guidance that flowed through it. And she heard Kaylin's voice, not as memory but as present transmission across light years. You're doing beautifully, Elena. The awakening spreads faster than we projected. Keep demonstrating. Keep teaching. Keep being the love frequency that dissolves fear. Humanity is remembering. Elena smiled, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. She looked up at the stars, knowing that among those countless points of light, consciousness was watching, hoping, celebrating as humanity took its first stumbling steps toward remembering its true nature. You've just heard Elena Chen's story of meeting a being who called Earth his childhood home, and learning that Jesus was a consciousness demonstrating abilities that every human possesses in dormant form. But this isn't just Elena's story. It's your story. Because everything Kaylin told Elena applies to you. You carry the same genetic heritage. You possess the same dormant abilities. You have the same potential to heal, to manifest, to communicate telepathically, to transcend the limitations that society told you were absolute. The only difference between you and Jesus is that he remembered who he was, and you forgot. He operated from love frequency constantly. You've been trained to operate from fear. He knew that consciousness creates reality. You've been taught that you're a powerless biological machine. But none of that teaching was true. It was programming designed to keep you controllable, manageable, dependent on external authorities. Here's what you can do starting today. First, practice heart-centered meditation. 5 minutes every morning. Focus on your heart, generate feelings of love and gratitude. Let that frequency expand throughout your body. Second, observe your thoughts. Notice when you're thinking from fear versus love. Gently shift toward love-based thinking whenever you catch yourself in fear patterns. Third, start small with manifestation. Don't try to create a mansion or $1 million immediately. Try what Elena did, manifest a 4th stone, heal a minor cut, notice synchronicities that seem too perfect to be coincidence. Fourth, find others who are awakening. You're not alone in this. Millions are experiencing the same recognition, the same remembering. Connect with them, practice together, support each other's growth. The awakening is happening whether you participate or not. But your participation determines whether you'll consciously experience this transformation or sleep through humanity's greatest evolutionary leap. If you're ready to go deeper, our ebook Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence provides detailed practices for activating these dormant capacities. The link is in the first pinned comment below. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for more stories about humanity's awakening. We share these accounts because you need to know. You are not crazy for sensing abilities within yourself that society denies. You are not alone in experiencing things that mainstream science can't explain. You are simply remembering what you forgot, that you are consciousness wearing human form, and consciousness has no limits except the ones you believe in. Leave a comment telling us, have you experienced abilities that seem impossible? Healing, telepathy, manifestation, precognition? Share your story. Your testimony helps others recognize their own experiences as valid. And share this video with anyone you sense is ready to remember. Not everyone will understand, but those who are meant to awaken will recognize the truth when they hear it. Jesus said, "These things I do, you shall do also, and greater things than these." He wasn't offering religious comfort. He was providing technical specifications. The question is, are you ready to remember who you really are? Are you ready to activate the divine potential that's been sleeping within you since before you were born? Are you ready to join the awakening that's transforming humanity from fearful slaves into empowered creators? If yes, then your journey begins now. Not tomorrow. Not when you're more ready. Now. Because Earth isn't just Kaylin's childhood home. It's yours too. You've incarnated here many times, in many forms, learning and growing and evolving. And this lifetime, this moment, is when you finally remember everything you've been forgetting for so long. Welcome home. Welcome to your true nature. Welcome to the awakening.